Welcome to Cadman's World. We're proud to present Mark Hamill reading the first 2 chapters from Norby, the Mixed-Up Robot, which is by Janet and Isaac Asimov. On this side, we'll hear Chapter 1. It sounds like Jeff is definitely into trouble and out of school.
Trouble? Asked Jeff a little shakily. Why am I in trouble? He was only 14, for all his height, and it seemed to him that he had been asking that question for at least 12 of those years. At first, he had had to ask it of his parents, then his older brother, his teacher, and his computer control. It hadn't been too bad then, but having to ask it now of the head of the Space Command was setting a new record. He didn't exactly feel good about it. Standing right next to Jeff was Agent 2 Gidlow, who was no help at all. He was dressed entirely in gray, and his angry red eyes glared at Jeff with contempt. Even his skin seemed sallow and off-color.
"You're not only in trouble," Gidlow said to Jeff. "You are trouble."
He turned to Admiral Yobo and cut the air horizontally with a sweep of his hand, as if that were Jeff's neck it was passing through.
"Admiral, when a troublemaker muddles the computers..."
The Admiral stayed calm. The Space Academy, which was under Space Command, had serious problems to face, and he was at the cutting edge of it all. The matter of a misbehaving cadet was not something he had to twist his insides over. Besides, he liked Jeff, who was the kind of tall and clumsy teenager he himself had been some years ago, though that was beside the point, and he found himself wearied now and then by Gidlow's strenuous disciplinarianism, though that was beside the point, too.
"See here, Gidlow,"
said Admiral Yobo with a mild frown corrugating his wide black forehead.
"Why all the fuss? Remember that you are not part of the Academy and have no authority here. If you're going to follow up every prank by hauling the cadet in question into my office to be grilled by Federation Security Control, I'm going to have no time for anything else. All I've gotten so far is that he was trying to sleep learn, and there's nothing in the rules against that."
"If you do it right, there isn't, Admiral,"
said Gidlow.
"Doing it wrong is another thing. He tied into the main computer network, he says, by accident."
"Of course by accident, Agent Gidlow," said Jeff earnestly. He pushed his curly brown hair out of his eyes and stood as straight as he could so he'd be taller than the agent. "I mean, why should I do it on purpose?" Gidlow smiled unpleasantly. His rather pointed teeth seemed as gray as his clothing and his sallow skin.
"If you prefer, Cadet, you did it out of stupidity, which is no better. Admiral, I bring this to you because it is a security expulsion matter, and that's for you to handle." "Security?" "The way this cadet tied himself into the main computer network, by accident, he says, has resulted in the kitchen computer getting the wrong set of data." "Data? What data?"
Gidlow pursed his lips.
"It would not be proper to discuss it before a cadet."
"Don't be a fool, Gidlow. If this is an expulsion matter, the young man has a right to know what he's done."
"One thing is, and it may be enough all by itself, as a result of his idiotic link-up, everything is being filtered through the kitchen computer. And this means, among other things, that all the recipes are now in Martian colony Swahili."
The Admiral, who had been playing with the buttons on his desk, began to chuckle as he stared into his private viewer.
"I see that one Jefferson Wells, age 14, failed to pass Martian colony Swahili last semester."
"Yes, sir," said Jeff, trying not to fidget. I didn't seem to get the hang of it. I'm doing my makeup now, sir, and I was trying to sleep learn before the final exam next week. I'm terribly sorry about the computer. I thought I was following the directions correctly, and I can't think where I went wrong."
"You can't think, period,"
said Gidlow.
What it amounts to, of course, Admiral, is that until the recipes are reconverted into Terran Basic, or until the kitchen computer is reprogrammed to handle the Martian Swahili, there's no way of running the kitchen. No one in Space Command is going to be able to eat. We won't even be able to have canned food released. I think, he added glumly, we might be able to get a supply of stock celery that hasn't yet been indexed.
What?
roared Yobo. Jeff stirred uneasily. He remembered with a sinking sensation that Admiral Yobo was famous for his thorough knowledge of Martian Swahili, including its colorful expletives, and also for his prodigious appetite.
Yes, sir,
said Gidlow stiffly.
but that's ridiculous.
Said Admiral Yobo through clenched teeth.
The computer should know Martian.
Gidlow looked sideways at Jeff, who was trying to stiffen his stand at attention even further. He said, almost in a whisper, "Very important secrets have been shoved into the kitchen computer, along with everything else. And computer control now says that everything in the kitchen computer is classified. That means the cook robots won't work, and it will be a long haul before we can get into the kitchen computer to do anything about it."
Which means, said the Admiral, it will be a long haul before any of us can get anything to eat.
Yes, sir, which is why this is expulsion material. In fact, we're going to have to take this cadet mentally apart before we expel him, in order to find out if he's learned any classified material.
"But Mr. Gidlow," said Jeff a little hoarsely, for his mouth had gone dry with fright. He had heard stories about what could happen to people under mental invasion. "I don't know any Swahili, not even now. The sleep learning didn't do any good, so I didn't get any classified material. I didn't get anything, except some strange Martian recipes."
Strange?
Said the Admiral, glowering.
You think Martian food is strange?
"Well, no, sir, that's not what I meant,"
Admiral,
Gidlow said.
he clearly got classified information he thinks are recipes. He must be taken apart.
Jeff felt desperate. "Well, there's nothing classified in me, just recipes. What makes them strange is that they're in Martian colony Swahili, which I keep telling you I don't understand."
Then how do you know their recipes? Eh? Admiral, this little troublemaker is convicting himself with his own mouth.
"I know the Martian names for some of their dishes," said Jeff. "That's how I know. I like to go to Martian restaurants. My brother used to take me to them all the time. He always said there's nothing like Martian cooking."
Quite right.
Admiral Yobo stopped glowering and nodded.
Quite right. Your brother has good sense.
That has nothing to do with anything, Admiral,
said Gidlow.
The cadet will have to leave school and come with me. I'll find out what he knows.
"I can't leave school," said Jeff. "The semester is almost over and I've signed up for summer school so I can learn advanced robotics and invent a hyperdrive." Gidlow sniggered.
With your record, you'll probably use the hyperdrive to send Space Command into the sun. No one's invented a hyperdrive, and no one ever will. And if anyone ever does, it won't be a numbskull like you. You're not going back to school because you're suspended. Permanently, I hope.
Yobo said very quietly,
"Am I not the one to make that decision?"
Well, yes, Admiral,
said Gidlow.
But under the circumstances, you'll find you can't make any other decision, where matters of security are concerned.
"Please," Jeff said faintly. "It was all an accident." The dark paneled walls of the Admiral's private office seemed to be closing in on him, and Gidlow seemed to be getting bigger and grayer.
Accident? Ha! You're a danger to the Solar Federation,
said Gidlow.
And even if you weren't, your stay at the Academy is over. It so happens, Admiral, that Cadet Jefferson Wells' tuition payments are long overdue. I have investigated the matter and found that there is no money with which to make the payment. The Wells Family Corporation is bankrupt. Farley Gordon Wells, the so-called Fargo Wells, has seen to that.
"No, that's not true," Jeff shouted in outrage. Admiral Yobo bent forward in his enormous chair.
Fargo Wells is the head of the family?
Yes, sir.
said Gidlow.
Do you know him?
Only slightly, said Yobo without any expression in his face. He used to be in the fleet.
Forced to resign. Because of general incompetence, I suspect. It clearly runs in the family. And he's just as incompetent in handling the family finances.
It's not so, Jeff said.
If it's not incompetence, then it's general sabotage. It's the only alternative. He could be in the pay of Ing's League for Power. One of Ing's spies.
You're wrong, shouted Jeff. My brother is no traitor. He wasn't forced to resign. He had to resign when our parents were killed in an accident, and there was no one else to run the family shipping business. And I'm sure he did a good job.
Such a good job, said Gidlow, that he didn't even leave you enough money to pay your tuition. Which doesn't matter, because even if you had 1,000,000 credits, you would have to leave. And that should be a consolation to you. You will come with me to security control for prolonged probing. And if you know where your brother is, I'll send you to him when we're quite through with you.
Gidlow looked up at the Admiral.
I tried to locate Fargo Wells and failed.
I don't know why, said Admiral Yobo calmly. I've consulted Computer Central, and there seems to have been no trouble. His fingers stabbed quickly at the control buttons on his desk, and the screen on the wall lit up. Jeff's heart leaped as his older brother's image appeared. He needed Fargo's strength and cheer. But that was only an initial feeling, followed by sudden dismay. There was no familiar twinkle in Fargo's sharp blue eyes, and his rumpled black hair was neatly combed. I really am in trouble, Jeff thought. Even Fargo isn't letting himself be himself on my account. Fargo's holographic image nodded gravely. I see that you have company, Admiral, and I can guess the reason. Does our Mr. Gidlow believe that Jeff is in Ing's pay? I admit that my kid brother is big for his age, but no space cadet should be forced to undergo one of Gidlow's famous probings. Even the matter of Ing the Ingrate should not justify that.
Your guesses miss the mark, Mr. Wells, Gidlow said stiffly. It is not that we suspect your brother of being in league with Ing, though there are few that we can completely trust these sad days. We merely want to find out what classified material he learned from the computer in Martian Swahili, and I assure you, we will. You will not stop me, Mr. Wells.
Gidlow, I admire your firm and absolute assurance, but Space Academy is part of Space Command, said Yobo. And when probing is in question, I somehow suspect that I am the final authority.
When matters of security are concerned, we cannot have divided responsibility, Admiral. With respect, I make the decisions there.
With respect, Gidlow, you don't. Yobo rose majestically, looming up like Mons Olympus on his native Mars. I will decide what's to be done with the boy. Suddenly, Fargo laughed and began to speak in rapid Martian colony Swahili. Gidlow gasped, while Admiral Yobo clenched his huge fists and frowned. Jeff felt bewildered. Fargo, what are you doing? Mentioning a few state secrets, little brother. The Admiral looked down at Jeff. You didn't understand a word of that, did you? No, sir.
He's lying,
Gidlow said. I don't think he is, said Yobo. It would have taken a polished actor to remain blank-faced, considering what Fargo Wells said. It is quite safe to accept the fact that Wells has just proved, in his little charade, that the boy's attempt to sleep-learn failed, as he said it did. He may return to the Academy.
I must protest, Admiral, said Gidlow. The director of the Academy has admitted to me that the boy's tuition is so far overdue that only his previously excellent record has kept him in school. She said she thought the boy could get a scholarship, but in view of his damage to the computers, that is not in the range of possibility now. As Admiral Yobo began to glower again, Fargo Wells intervened smoothly.
There is something in what Gidlow says, Admiral. We don't have much money, and we can't pay any tuition. It's almost summer, and my brother can probably use a vacation, and, well, we may be able to begin to restore our fortunes in the interval. He winked at Jeff. But Jeff drew back at the suggestion. I don't want a vacation, Admiral. I like it at the Academy. I want to join the fleet someday.
Not this summer, said Fargo flatly. And it will be worthwhile for you, Jeff. We're not completely penniless. We have a scout ship, and we can get spacer jobs, which will be useful experience. There's even enough to get you back to Earth by transmit so that we can celebrate summer solstice together.
At any other time, Jeff's heart would have bounded at the thought. Summer solstice was tomorrow, and the entire system would be at one in its celebration. All the giant space homes, or SPOMs, each with their tens of thousands of inhabitants, the lunar state, the Martian colony, all kept the conventions of the calendar of the Earth's northern hemisphere. Even Australia had finally given in. It was in deference to the original Solar Federation headquarters in the old UN on the northern hemisphere island of what was now the Manhattan International Territory, which had agreed to consider itself, rather reluctantly, part of the Solar Federation. Jeff turned pleadingly to the Admiral. If I can be allowed to stay on at the Academy, sir, for my summer courses... Fargo intervened.
Kids that mix up computers need to get away from them and stay a while in a nice primitive spot like Manhattan, under my care, of course. Don't you agree, Admiral?
Fargo and Yobo exchanged a long look. Jeff felt resentful. He hated it when grown-ups talked over his head as if he were not there. Fargo hardly ever did that. What was the matter?
Yes, said Yobo. Go and pack, Jefferson Wells.
But I...
began Gidlow. The boy goes home, said Yobo. He's of no interest to you. Come on, Jeff, said Fargo. The faster you hurry, the sooner you'll be deprived of Gidlow's fascinating company. Come on, and I'll tell you interesting stories about the misdeeds and ambitions of Ing the Ingrate. Remember the motto, TGAF, eh? See you tonight.
His image faded out.
What does that motto mean?
Demanded Gidlow. Jeff thought quickly. That's just Fargo's way. He means all difficulties can be overcome.
TGAF, all difficulties can be overcome? Admiral, there is some sort of conspiracy.
No, said Jeff. It's just the way he thinks of difficulties. He's so handsome that, well, TGAF means the girls are findable. The Admiral burst into a loud roar of laughter.
That's authentic Fargo,
he said, and Jeff tried to stifle his sigh of relief.
In any case, said Gidlow, this boy will not be coming back to the Academy. Be sure of that, boy.
He swirled out, the very lines of his back showing his anger. Why does he hate me so, Jeff wondered. But Admiral Yobo, looking down kindly at him, said,
Things will be better after a while, Jefferson. I once knew your parents, you know. They were good friends of mine, and good seismologists, too, till Yo got them. Not good business people, though, any more than Fargo is.
He held out a slip of paper to Jeff. What is this, sir?
A credit voucher. Use it to buy a teaching robot, one that can tie into the solar educational system. Learn enough to get back into the Academy on a scholarship.
Jeff put his hands behind his back. Sir, I won't be able to pay you back.
I think you will. I don't think Fargo would ever be able to, but somehow I suspect you have a firmer hold on common sense than he has. Anyway, it isn't that much money, because I'm not all that rich, or all that generous. You'll have to buy a used robot. Here, take it. That's an order.
Yes, sir, said Jeff, saluting automatically. He hurried out, confused and worried. TGAF. Was Fargo right? Packing did not take much time. Cadets owned very little besides clothing and notes, although Jeff did have one valuable item, thanks to Fargo, a book. It was a genuine antique, a leather-bound volume with yellow-edged pages that had never been restored. It contained all of Shakespeare's plays in the original, in the very language from which Terran Basic was derived. Jeff hoped nobody from security control would stop him, open the Shakespeare, and see Fargo's underlining in Henry V, or that, if they did, they wouldn't understand the old language. The game's afoot, Henry had cried out, but what game was Fargo after with his TGAF? Was it Ing? Jeff told his closer friends among his classmates about the bankruptcy and the kitchen computer, but he went no farther than that. He put the book in his duffel bag with a fine air of indifference, even though he was alone in his quarters. One should always practice caution. He took the shuttle to Mars. Once on Mars, he made a quick meal of spicy eggplant slices on cheese, as only Martian cooks could make it. Then he lined up at the Mars City matter transmitter. Through the dome, he could see the distant vastness of Mons Olympus, the largest heap of matter on any world occupied by human beings. It made him feel very small and very poor. Maybe I should give the credit voucher to Fargo, Jeff thought. He needs it more than I need a teaching robot. But I've always wanted a teaching robot, came the immediately rebellious afterthought. Well's next. For a second, Jeff almost decided to turn on his heel. Why should he take the transmit? It was so expensive. Matter transmitters had been in use for years, but they still required enormous power and very complex equipment, and the cost of using them reflected that. Most people took the space ferry from Mars to Luna and then to Earth. Why shouldn't Jeff be one of them? Especially now with the family near bankruptcy. Still, the ferry took over a week, and with the transmit he would be home today. And Fargo clearly wanted him there in a hurry. All this went through Jeff's head in the time it took for the most momentary of hesitations. He went into the room. It was packed with people, luggage, and freight boxes. The people all looked rich or official, and Jeff slumped in his seat, hoping no one would notice him. As he waited for the power to go on, he wished again that he could invent a hyperdrive. Everyone knew there actually was a thing called hyperspace, because that's what high comms used for the instantaneous voice and visual communication that was now so common. It was by high comm that Fargo's image had appeared in the Admiral's office, for instance. That's what high comm meant, after all, hyperspatial communication. Well then, if they could force radiation through hyperspace, why couldn't they force matter through it? Surely there should be some way of devising a motor that would let a spaceship go through hyperspace, bypassing the speed of light limit that existed in normal space. It probably meant that the matter would have to be converted into radiation first, and then the radiation would have to be reconverted into matter. Or else... 50 years ago, an anti-grav device had been invented. And before then, everyone had said that was impossible. Now anti-gravs could be manufactured small enough to fit into a car. Maybe the two impossibles had a connection. If you use anti-gravs in connection with matter transmitters that operated only at sublight speeds, you could... He blacked out. One always did that in transmit. There was no sensation of time passage, but the room was different. It held the same contents, but it was a different room. He could see the clock in the cavernous chamber outside. Not quite 10 minutes had passed, so the transmission had been carried through at... He calculated rapidly in his head, allowing for the present positions of Mars and Earth in their orbits. Not quite half light speed. Jeff adjusted his watch, walked out of the transmitter room, and was on Earth. He wondered if his molecules had survived the transmission properly. Now, wasn't this a case of conversion into radiation and back? After a fashion. Surely it could be improved to the point where... Oh, well. The matter transmission people always insisted that it was impossible for molecules to be messed up in transit, and no one had ever claimed damage. Still... Nothing I can do about it anyway, Jeff decided. But if you were going to take the risk, he thought, why not do the thing right? Hyperdrive would be much the better deal. It might still mean conversion to radiation and back, but at least you could go anywhere, and that would give you much more in return for the risk. Right now, by transmit, you could only go to another transmit station. If you wanted to go somewhere that didn't have a transmit, you would have to go by ferry or freighter to the nearest transmit, and that could take anywhere from weeks to years. No wonder the Federation was stuck in the solar system. And that's why Ing's rebellion was so dangerous. Jeff called the family apartment from Grand Central Station, Manhattan's public transmit terminal, to let the housekeeping computer have enough time to send cleaning robots out to make a last-minute cleanup of the dust. The apartment, when he got there, looked as always. Old, of course, but that was as it should be. All the Welleses had been proud to own an apartment on Fifth Avenue in a building that had been kept going, apparently with glue and wishes, for centuries. It had disadvantages, but it was homier.
"Welcome, Master Jeff,"
said the housekeeper computer from the wall. "Hi," Jeff grinned. It was nice to be scanned and recognized.
"There is a message for you from your brother Fargo, Master Jeff,"
said the computer, and a cello strip pushed out of the message slot with a faint buzz. It was the address of a used robot shop, which meant that Fargo and Admiral Yobo had talked again after Jeff had left the office. Why, Jeff wondered. For old time's sake? Did Gidlow know? It was still afternoon in Manhattan. There was time to go to the shop. Jeff felt faintly uneasy about buying the robot now that he was about to make a purchase. Should he argue with Fargo and try to make him take the Admiral's money for himself? But the Admiral had to have talked with Fargo on the subject. There had to be something behind all this. But what? Before leaving, Jeff dialed a hamburger from the kitchen computer, which was always in perfect order thanks to Fargo. He said, "First things first," and hunger came first, even for him, let alone for a growing boy. How much more will I grow, thought Jeff. It was a good hamburger. The self-important fat little man who ran the used robot shop considered the sum Jeff announced he had at his disposal and didn't seem at all impressed.
"If you use that for a down payment,"
he said,
"you can have an almost new model like this. A very good buy."
What he referred to as this was one of the new, vaguely humanoid cylindrical robots in use as teachers at all the expensive schools. They could tie into main computer systems in any city and have access to any library or information outlet. They were smooth, calm, respectful, good teachers. Jeff studied the almost new model, wishing that manufacturers had not decided years ago to make intelligent robots look only slightly like human beings. The theory was that people wouldn't want robots that could be mistaken for real people. Maybe they were right, but Jeff would much rather have one that could be mistaken for a real person than one that could be mistaken only for a cartoon of a real person. The almost new model had a head like a bowling ball, with a senso strip halfway up like a slipped halo. It was the senso strip that served as eyes, ears, and so on, keeping the robot in general touch with the universe. He stepped closer to look at the serial number above the senso strip. A low one would mean it was fairly old, and not as almost new as the manager of the store made it sound. The number was quite low. What's more, Jeff didn't like the color combination of the senso strip. Each one was different, for easier differentiation of individual robots, and this one was clashing and unaesthetic. But it didn't matter whether Jeff liked or didn't like any part of that robot. If he used his money for a down payment, where would the rest come from? He just couldn't commit himself to monthly payments for a year or two. He looked about vaguely at the transparent stasis boxes, each of which held a robot with a brain that was not in operation. Was there something he could afford here? Something he could buy in full? An older model that worked? He noticed a stasis box in a corner, all but obscured by others in front of it. He wriggled between two boxes and moved one of them in order to look into it. Half hidden like that, it had to be a not-so-good robot, but that was exactly what he could afford. Actually, what was inside didn't look like a robot at all. Of course, it had to be one, because that was what stasis boxes were for. Any intelligent robot had to be kept in stasis until sold. If the positronic brain were activated and then just kept waiting to be sold, it would get addled. Just standing around doing nothing, thought Jeff, that would addle me. "What's in that box?" said Jeff abruptly. The manager craned his neck to see which box Jeff was referring to, and a look of displeasure crossed his face.
"Hasn't that thing been disposed of yet? You don't want that, young man."
"It must be an awfully old robot," said Jeff. The thing in the box looked like a metal barrel about 60 centimeters high, with a metal hat on top of it. It didn't seem to have legs or arms or even a head. Just a barrel and a hat. The hat had a circular brim and a dome on top. Jeff continued to push the other boxes out of the way. He bent down to see the object more clearly. It really was a metal barrel, dented and battered, with a label on it. It was an old paper label that was peeling off. It said, Norb's Nails. Jeff could now distinguish places in the barrel where arms might come out if circular plates were dilated.
Don't bother with that,
said the manager, shaking his head violently.
It's a museum piece. If any museum would take it, it's not for sale.
But what is it? Is it really a robot?
It's a robot, all right. One of the very ancient R2 models. There's a story to it if anyone is interested. It was falling apart, and an old spacer bought it, fixed it up.
What old spacer? Jeff had heard stories about the old explorers of the solar system, the human beings who went off alone to find whatever might be strange or profitable or both. Fargo knew all the stories and complained that independent spacers were getting rare now that Ing's spies were everywhere, and now that Ing's pirates stole from anyone who dared travel to little-known parts of the system without official Federation escort.
The story is that it was someone named McGillicuddy, but I never met anyone who ever heard of him. Did you ever hear of him?
No, sir.
He's supposed to have died half a century ago, and his robot was knocked down to my father at an auction. I inherited him, but I certainly don't want him.
Why isn't it for sale, then?
Because I've tried selling it. It doesn't work right, and it's always returned. I've got to scrap it.
Well, how much do you want for it, sir? The manager looked at him thoughtfully.
Didn't you just hear me tell you that it doesn't work right?
Well, yes, sir. I understand that.
Would you be willing to sign a paper saying you understand that, and that you cannot return it even if it doesn't work right?
Jeff felt a cold hand clutching at his chest as he thought of the Admiral's money being thrown away. But he wanted that robot with its spacer heritage and its odd appearance. Certainly it would be a robot such as no one else had. He said, with teeth that had begun to chatter a bit. Sure, I'll sign if you take the money I have in full payment and give me a receipt saying paid in full. I also want a certificate of ownership entered into the city computer records.
Huh,
the manager said.
You're underage.
I look 18. Don't ask to see my papers, and you can say you thought I was of age.
All right. I'll get the papers filled out.
He turned away, and Jeff squatted. He leaned forward and peered into the stasis box. This McGillicuddy must have put the workings of a robot into an empty barrel used for Norb's nails. Jeff looked more closely, putting his face against the dusty plastic and lifting one hand to block off light reflections. He decided that the hat was not all the way down. A band of darkness underneath showed that the robot had been put in stasis with its head not completely inside the barrel. And there was a strange thin wire stretching from inside the darkness to the side of the stasis box.
Don't touch that,
shouted the manager, who had happened to look up from his records. It was too late. Jeff's outstretched finger touched the stasis box. The manager had hopped over, mopping his forehead with a large handkerchief.
I said don't touch it. Are you all right?
Of course, said Jeff, stepping back.
You didn't get a shock or anything?
I didn't feel a thing. But I did feel an emotion, thought Jeff. Awful loneliness. Not mine. The manager looked at him suspiciously.
I warned you. You can't claim damage or anything like that.
I don't want to, said Jeff. What I want is for you to open that stasis box so I can have my robot.
First, you'll sign this paper, which says you're 18. I don't want you ever bringing it back.
He kept grumbling to himself as he put it through the computer-print device that scanned the writing and turned it into neat print in triplicate. Jeff read the paper rapidly.
You look 18,
the manager said.
Anyone would say so. Now, let me see your identification.
It will tell you my birth date.
Well, cover it with your thumb. I'm not bright and won't notice you've done that. I just want to check your name and signature.
He looked at the signature on the card Jeff presented.
All right, he said. There's your copy. Now, credit voucher, please.
He looked at it, placed it in his credit slot, and returned it to Jeff, who winced, for it meant that virtually everything the Admiral had given him had been transferred quite permanently from his account into the store's. It left him with practically nothing. The manager waddled through the mess of boxes and touched the raised number on the dial box of the one that held the robot in the barrel. The top opened. With that, the thin wire slowly withdrew into the barrel, and the hat-like lid seemed to settle down firmly so that the band of darkness disappeared. The manager didn't seem to notice. He was too busy trying to shift the stasis box into better position. "Careful, careful," said Jeff. "Don't hurt the robot." With its hat up and its wire out, Jeff wondered if the robot had really been in a position to think. He felt again a stab of sympathy. If that had been so, it must have been awful to be trapped inside a box, able to think but unable to get out. How long had it been there? It must have felt so helpless. "Please," he said to the manager, "you're being too rough. Let me help you lift it out."
Too rough, said the manager with a sneer. Nothing can hurt it. For one thing, it's too far gone.
He looked up at Jeff with an unpleasant expression on his face.
You signed the paper, you know. I told you it doesn't work right, so you can't back out. I don't think you can use it for teaching purposes because it doesn't have the attachments that will allow it to tie into the education system. It doesn't even talk. It just makes sounds that I can't make sense of.
Now, for the first time, something happened inside the barrel. The hat-like lid shot up and hit the shopkeeper in the shoulder as he was leaning over the box. Underneath the lid was half a face. At least that's what it looked like. There were two big eyes. No! Jeff leaned across and saw that there were also two big eyes at the back. Or maybe that was the front.
Ouch,
said the manager. He lifted a fist. Jeff said, "You'll just hurt yourself if you try to hit it, sir. Besides, it's my robot now, and I'll have the law on you if you damage it." The robot said in a perfectly clear voice that was a high and almost musical tenor,
"That vicious man insulted me. He's been insulting me a lot. Every time he mentions me, he insults me. I can speak perfectly well, as you can hear. I can speak better than he can. Just because I have no desire to speak to my inferior, such as that so-called manager, doesn't mean I can't speak."
The manager kept puffing out his cheeks and seemed to be trying to say something, but nothing came out. Jeff said, quite reasonably, "That robot certainly can speak better than you can right now."
"What's more," said the robot, "I am a perfectly adequate teaching robot, as I will now demonstrate. What is your name, young man?"
"Jeff Wells."
"And what is it you would care to learn?"
"Swahili, the Martian colony dialect, sir." It suddenly occurred to Jeff that he ought to show a decent respect to a robot that clearly displayed a certain tendency to irascibility and a shortness of temper.
"Good. Take my hand and concentrate. Don't let anything distract you."
The little robot's left, or possibly right side, dilated to a small opening, out of which shot an arm with a swivel elbow and two-way palms, so that it was still impossible to tell which was its front and which its back. Jeff took the hand, which had a pleasantly smooth, but not slippery, metallic texture.
"You will now learn how to say good morning, how are you, in Martian Swahili,"
said the robot. Jeff concentrated. His eyebrows shot up, and he said something that clearly made no sense to the manager.
That's just gibberish,
said the manager, shrugging. "No, it isn't," said Jeff. "I know a little Swahili, and what I said was Martian Swahili for good morning, how are you? Only this is the first time I've been able to pronounce it correctly."
In that case,
said the manager hastily,
you can't expect to get a teaching robot that's in working order for a miserable 85 credits.
"No, I can't," said Jeff, "but that's what I got it for. I have the paper and you have the money, and that ends it, unless you want me to tell the police you tried to sell an inoperable robot to a 14-year-old. I'm sure this robot can act inoperable if I ask him to." The manager was puffing again. The robot seemed to be getting taller. In fact, it was getting taller. Telescoping legs were pushing out of the bottom of the barrel with feet that faced in both directions. The robot's eyes were now closer to the level of the little shopkeeper, who was a good head shorter than Jeff. The robot said,
I would suggest, inferior person, that you return the 85 credits to this young man and let him have me for nothing. An inoperable robot is worth nothing.
The manager shrieked and stepped back, falling over a stasis box containing a set of robot weeders.
That thing is dangerous. It doesn't obey the laws of robotics. It threatened me.
He began to shout,
Help! Help!
Don't be silly, mister, Jeff said. He was just making a suggestion, and you can keep the 85 credits. I don't want them. The manager mopped his brow again.
All right, then. Get it out of here. It's your responsibility. I don't want ever to see that robot again. Or you either.
Jeff walked out, holding the hand of a barrel that had once contained Norb's nails, and had now sprouted 2 legs, 2 arms, and half a head. You've got a big mouth, said Jeff.
How can you tell?
Said the robot.
I talk through my hat.
You sure do. What's your name?
Well, Mac, that was McGillicuddy, called me Mako. But I didn't like that. Mac and Mako sounds like a hyperwave comedy team. But at least he referred to me as he instead of it. That was something anyway. It showed respect. What would you like to call me, Jeff?
Jeff should have corrected the robot. All robots were supposed to put a title before a human name, but it was clear that the robot he had didn't follow customs too well, and Jeff decided he didn't mind that. Besides, he would get tired of being called Master Jeff. He said, Have you always been inside a barrel of Norb's nails?
No, only since McGillicuddy found me. That is, since he repaired me. He was a genius at robotics, you know.
Then, with obvious pride, the robot added,
The barrel is part of me, and I won't wear out. Not ever.
Oh, I don't know, said Jeff coolly. Your label just fell off.
That's because I don't need a label. This old but serviceable barrel doesn't contain nails any longer. It contains me. I like this barrel. It's good, strong stainless steel.
All right, said Jeff. In that case, since this wonderful barrel once held Norb's nails, why don't I call you Norby? The robot blinked and said,
Norby. Norby?
As though he were rolling the sound round on his tongue and tasting it, except that he didn't have a tongue and probably couldn't taste. Then he said,
I like it. I like it very much.
Good, said Jeff. And he and Norby walked off, still hand in hand.